Good morning, dear students. Welcome back to our online class. So here you are watching Chaya ma'am, and today we'll be continuing our English literature short story B.Wordsworth. Today we'll be coming to the climax of the story where we see actually about whom or who is this B.Wordsworth and about what actually he was talking all throughout the story. Okay, so we have seen that when the boy visited the last time, the man was B.Wordsworth, his friend. He found him too older, grown so weak, and as if he is waiting for his death. He had a very shrinking face, sullen eyes, okay, sunken cheeks, okay. So all these shows that the man has become too weak, and the boy literally felt very sad for him, and tears started rolling down his cheeks, and he almost felt like crying, and he was literally crying. And during this time also, his friend, okay, shows that he tried to console the little boy and says that I will tell you a story. Okay, so do you want me to tell you a funny story this time? And he smiled encouragingly at me. And the man was not at all sad for his lot, for his condition, okay. And he as if he knew that what is going to happen with him, and he accepted that this is the reality, okay. So many times it happens that we run away from the reality, though we know that these are the things that happening with us, or these are the things that is going to happen, but we don't want to accept it, isn't it? And we just keep on keeping an illusion or creating a kind of impact that we are not aware of that, or we don't want to think or become aware of that, okay. So with a very happy smile on his face, the man actually very encouragingly tells the boy that you want to listen to a story. Here I am ready to tell you a story. But the boy was with lot of pain and at heart, he was actually not able to give any answer to the question that was asked by the man at his deathbed, okay. So we'll continue today from page number 124, the last part of the story here, the climax of the story. And he said that when I have finished this story, I want you to promise that you will not go away and never come back to see me. Do you promise? So now the man also makes a promise, or asks the boy to give a promise to him, that is, when I complete this story, I want you to promise to me that you will go away from here, and here after that you will never come back to see me, okay. So this was a condition kept by the man to the boy, okay. And he asked the boy that, do you promise me? So I want this promise from you that after completing the story you will never come back to see me, okay. So I nodded. So though we know that the speaker is the boy himself, the narrator. So he says that he nodded. He said, good, well, listen, okay, fine, okay, now I'm going to tell the story. That is, the stranger, the poet B.Wordsworth, is going to tell the story to the narrator. The story I told you about the boy poet and the girl poet. Do you remember that? So we just tried to make the boy recall the previous story which he already narrated to him. And that story is the story of the boy poet and the girl poet. So we have seen that the boy poet and girl poet lived together. The girl poet loved plants and trees. She used to plant a lot of plants and trees in the yard. And the boy poet, after her death, never touched those plants and trees in the yard, okay. So we have seen this is a story that actually he narrated previously. So he asked the boy that, do you remember that story which I told you about the boy poet and the girl poet? It was something I just made up. And he says that that was not actually any original or real story. It was just a cooked up story. It's a story that I made up. All this talk about the poetry and the greatest poem in the world, that wasn't true either. Isn't that funniest thing that you have heard? So now he says that comes to realization. What is that? He says that all this talk about poetry. So whatever I have communicated to you about poetry, that from the beginning, till now. That is from the beginning. Let us have a recall. In the first part of the story, we have seen that the man said that I have a poem, do you want to buy? And it is for 4 cents only, right? And his mother said, I don't have the money. And the boy also said, my mother don't have the money, so she can't buy. Then after that, when he came to the street, he was selling that poetry, and the boy was asking that, are you still continuing to sell the poetry, isn't it? So he says that poetry lies exist everywhere. Okay, there is I can see a poet in you, I can see a poet in me, I can see a poet in the nature, in the surroundings, and even in the life of the people itself. Okay, so after that, again we see that he said that I will tell you the greatest secret of mine, and that is I am writing a very great poem. Okay, and every month I write only one line in that great poem, and in 22 years, in coming 22 years, I expect that I will be completing that poem. Okay, so now he says, the in between he says stories. Again we have seen that they count the stars at the sky, and they try to come to certain conclusions. Okay, now all these talks, so this is what the B.Wordsworth comes to the realistic conversation. Now till now he was actually, whatever he has communicated to the boy or the narrator from the beginning till now, he says that all this talk about poetry, about literature, and the greatest poem, because every story is a literature, every poem is a literature, every imagination and thought is a literature. Okay, so that means we are living in literature. Okay, so poetry and the greatest poem in the world, that wasn't true. So he says that that wasn't true actually either. Isn't that the fun? And he says that, don't you think it's the funniest thing? So boy seems that, what is this? Is he crack? Okay, he has gone mad that he is speaking, and the boy was actually not trying to understand what exactly the B.Wordsworth is trying to communicate. Okay, so and when he was speaking this, it felt like he was speaking from the bottom of his heart. And as he was telling this to the boy noticed that his voice is getting break. Okay, I left the house and ran home crying, and he couldn't stand himself seeing his friend. And every time the boy used to say, if you remember in the story or rewind the story, you can see that every time B.Wordsworth narrates something new, whether it's a poem, whether it's a story, or whether it's an experience of life, or whether it's an experience of anything, whenever he shares something new with the boy looks at the face of the man, and he always feel that the man was growing older and older. Now also at his deathbed, when the boy sees the man telling these things to him, again the boy looking at his face seems to be the man to be growing older and older. Now you have to remember, at current time the B.Wordsworth is at his deathbed. Okay, so now when he says he's growing older and older, so you can imagine, or you have to think in this way manner, that he is at the verge of his death. Okay, maybe this is a reason that the B.Wordsworth he took a promise from the boy that when I complete this story, you promise me that you will not stay here, and you will go away, and you will never come back to see me again. Okay, so and the boy did not wait there. Okay, he left the house immediately and ran home crying like a poet for everything I saw. Okay, I walked along Alberto. So he said that I just left out crying louder like a poet for everything I saw. Means he saw from the birth of a poet till the death of a poet. Okay, so he said that I walked along Alberto Street a year later. Now all this he don't know what has happened to the B.Wordsworth. As per the promise he has kept, he did not come there, and after 1 year he was walking along the street, but he could find no sign of the poet's house. So after 1 year he couldn't see the house there, he couldn't see those gru trees, palm trees, though that relishing mango tree. Okay, it hadn't vanished. Okay, just like that, but I could find no sign of the poet's house. It hadn't vanished just like that. It had been pulled down and a big two-storied building had taken its place. Okay, so in that place there is a huge two-storied building is there. The mango tree and the plum tree and the coconut tree had all been cut down, and there was brick and concrete everywhere. And in those places where he used to see those trees, they were actually substituted by the brick and concrete. It was just as though B. Wordsworth had never existed. So actually, what is the story all about? The story is that whether, now the question arises in our mind, that whether the B. Wordsworth as a poet, as a man, really existed there, or whether all these things is just an illusion or an imagination of the boy or the speaker here. Okay, so here actually we'll be discussing the important themes, that is the story a year later when the boy sees that there was only nothing existed there. Okay, that existence of nothing is actually showing that whatever the boy was knowing about this particular poet and the stories related to him in literature, in fiction, is actually a poem in his imagination. Okay, so this story discusses mainly about the two important themes. Okay, the two important theme, one is that poetry has become like a one of the source of the trouble. That is, one of the themes this is that in modern materialistic world, poetry actually holds no charm, isn't it? How many, let me ask this to you, how many of you are interested in reading the poem or enjoying the poem unless it is prescribed in your syllabus and you are supposed to study for your examination purpose? Otherwise, I'm sure that no one will really in present time have the taste to read the poem, okay, or to enjoy or to appreciate the poem here. Okay, so because we all are in the technological world, we come across so many, even today, even in this technological era, we have lot of literature and fictional works in the audio form, in the podcast or etc., where it has made convenient for the people who are interested to listen rather than spending a lot of time in reading and understanding. Even then also we see that very less percentage of the fiction and literature are being appreciated and read by the people in the present time. Okay, so actually this is it's showing that the materialistic world, poetry in this modern time, in the materialistic world, poetry holds no charm, and the poets are only looked upon as a very crazy abnormal persons. Okay, very even emotional tramps, because they write poetry, that's why they are considered as emotional tramps. And poetry is and those writers have no respect, right? They were considered as a bad professions, they were not encouraged, they were not paid well. Okay, and it is certainly considered as a bad profession. It is often not saleable. It's very difficult to get your poems, even you are interested in writing, it's very difficult to get your writings published. If in today's scenario, if you have to publish, you have to pay the money to them, and then you have to get it published in some magazines. Okay, there, because the art, the literature and the literary is very rarely recognized in the present time. So that is why when the boy in the story asks his mother if she would give little penny, the mother thinks that to buy a poetry is something worthless, isn't it? What I'll do, it's only a paper and few lines scribbled in that. It is not going to help the mother in any sense. So she is not going to waste 4 cents for that, isn't it? Okay, so then she says that she uses the word, tell that blasted man. Blasted man is actually, it's a ridicule term used for a poet, and that shows that there is no respect for the writers. Okay, then again if you pick out lot of examples from the poem, it actually ensures this statement, okay, that there is no value for the writers in the present time. In the materialistic and realistic world, they are not considered as a good profession. Again, beside that, we can see that they are not given the respect, okay. So in such circumstances, the poet can do little, and the survival, the question arrives of the survival of these writers, isn't it? So when their works are not sold, when their works are not published in magazines, or in as in the form of the books, they are not having any kind of income, and it is a question of their survival. Again, it is also ridiculing the art and the artistic talent of the writers itself, okay. So this is what we can see. This is what is that the poetry or literature itself has become a source of trouble in this materialistic world. Another theme that we will be seeing in this particular story is that the demise of an old era, okay. The story starts, if you just recollect, the story implicitly states that good values such as love, devotion, sincerity, sentimentalism, sensitivity, etc., have completely vanished from the new world, okay. So people are being ignored, people are being not given priority, or there is no kind of showing the kind of humanity towards the others. And here you can see that the poet B.Wordsworth and the boy Sunny may or may not be the poets. They may be the poets or they may not be the poets, but they are certainly endowed with the poetic temperament, okay. So they might have a budding poet in that. And normally we see in our surroundings, if any person is having a little bit of talent in writing something and even scribbles 3 or 4 lines, more than encouraging them, people first start making fun of them. And what happens is that that confidence which they have is discouraged, and gradually they will stop themselves growing up in the form of writers, okay. So this is what is the perception of the society towards the writers, and that is why we can see that. And both of in the story, many times it has been mentioned that the poet and the boy both were the great watchers, observers. Even the beginning part of the poem story itself says that the man approaches the boy's house because he want to just watch the beehives, isn't it? So when he says that he just want to watch the beehive, it shows that he is a great observer there, okay. Watching of the ants, how many of us we do really watch the ants? The great philosophers say that if you watch the ants, they are the lesson for us, isn't it? Okay, so how disciplined life they lead actually. And beside that, you can see that how they are very good planners, okay. They schedule their activities. How they schedule, we know that in the whole summer time they collect the food and they store it for their winter. They schedule their activities, they foresee the things. So there are so many things if we watch this small creature, and we will be able to learn from them, okay. So that is what he said, that we are not even watching something, observing something and seeing something is having the lot of differences, okay. The poet tells him his own love story indirectly. So when he talks about the boy poet and when he talks about the girl poet, indirectly the poet, many of you might have thought like that, okay. So indirectly the poet was telling his own story, and later he tells that he claims that that story was a lie, I just cooked up, it's made up story. And the death of the poet becomes a big shock to the boy, because the boy feels that the poet's death is the death of his own poetic world, okay. Now what happened to that greatest poem which he left out, okay, which where he, every line that he used to jot down is so meaningful, okay. The past is deep, that's only one line that is referred in the story, but it has so many meanings, okay. So we always don't read between the words, read between the lines, and once we try to understand the things, then every one of us can be a good writers, or there lies a kind of poet in every one of us. Okay, so this is actually the theme discussed here. Beside this, the story also talks about the theme of escapism. Now, what do you mean by the theme of escapism? I'll just brief it out. Escapism can be defined as a habitual diversion of the mind to purely imaginative activity or entertainment to forget about the harsh realities of life. Okay, now people say that when a person who has come across lots of problems and difficulties throughout his life, and that type of people normally involve themselves in the imaginative world, isn't it? And their involvement of that imaginative world is actually running away from their realities. Okay, and because they never want to face the realities, or they lack the courage to face the realities, and they keep on running that. And how long you keep on running from the things, it keeps on following you, and you will not be able to overcome that. Okay, so this is what the story also gives a little bit of highlight towards this theme of the escapism. Okay, now how it is connected in this story, let us have a look into that. B.Wordsworth is actually a poet, but he is a failure poet. Okay, now how come we disintegrate the poet as a successful poet and failure poets? Okay, so B words, we have seen in the story, it has meant he was asking the people to, will you buy my poet? Okay, now a successful poet doesn't need to go and ask the people that whether you will be buying my poet, right? So if he has to do that, that means his works are not up to the accomplishment level. Again, his poems are not so attractive, or it is not so comprehensible for the people to understand and appreciate it. Okay, so that is why we see that B. Wordsworth is a failure as a poet, but he embraces the escapism by excessively praising his own poetry. Now, how he run away from that reality, he don't want to accept it that he is a failure poet. Okay, so since he doesn't want to accept that reality, he praises about his own poet. I written many poems, I have written great poems, my poems are, people when they read, so it's a kind of self boasting, and it's a kind of self praising, and this is done because to overcome from that truth, okay, that he is a failure poet. Okay, so he embraces this kind of fake admiration of himself. Okay, and he is disillusioned and also prefers to live in the world of imagination. Now, such people, those who run away from the reality, as I mentioned you, they love to be more in the midst of that imaginative world, isn't it? So especially if you have noticed the small children, especially if there is only one child in a family, they might be hardly, and if the family is not a joint family and it's a nuclear family, you can see that for that child, his toys will be his world, isn't it? His toys will, you remember the story we have learned, Fritz, in that we have seen the childhood days of the Jayanto, right? And Jayanto was so idle child, he was so isolated, he grew up lonely, he was not having the friends, and this is how he grew an attachment to his favorite doll, that is Fritz. Okay, you remember that? So at that time I mentioned that these type of children, they more than in the world of reality, they since they don't have much friends, they are not easily interactive with other, or they remain alone most of the times. Such children develop a habit of living in an imaginative world, and for them all their toys are their friends. They eat with them, they play with them, okay, they sleep with them. Okay, so all these actually makes them to run away from the reality and the fact that they are alone, and these are the things, these are my world. Okay, so that is also shows a kind of escapism here. So here also we can see that he admires that great poet. He took even the name B. Wordsworth itself is not the original name. He took it as if he is borrowed from the famous poet William Wordsworth's name. Okay, so he knows that in reality nobody has ever bought a single copy of his poem. So that is why he says that, and he claims that the poem he wants to sell is the greatest poem about mothers. Okay, so here we can see the character B. Wordsworth is actually an escapist, and he has not achieved anything in reality. His dreams are all in his head. The stories, the poems, his achievements, okay, everything is actually in his imagination, in his illusion, and his actions do not complement his dreams and aspirations. His actions, his interaction with the boy, the stories he narrate with the boy do not have any relation or any kind of connection with the actuality. Okay, so he wishes to write the poem that would speak to all humanity, but he never succeeds. He wanted to communicate so many things. He wanted to communicate about love, he wanted to communicate about sincerity, he wanted to communicate about the humanity, he wanted to communicate about the the naturalistic sentimentalism. So many things he actually have in his mind, but actually he is not able to communicate it. So here we can see that the poet, the character B. Wordsworth, is conscious of his escape. He knew that what he is doing exactly. Okay, he is very conscious, and that is why he admits at the end of the story to the boy, to the narrator, that whatever he has communicated, he talked about the poetry, is a lie. It's a cooked up story. He knew that he is running away. He knew that he is himself is an escapist. So towards the end of the story, that's why we see that he shatters the boy's illusion of a romantic world. So he gave the boy an illusion that this world is very beautiful, it is so romantic, look at the stars, look at the sky, etc. So he just created that illusion in the boy's mind, and all of a sudden that whole illusion is shattered out when he admits the reality that whatever he spoke is just a lie, it's a cooked up one. Okay, now this he does because he wants the boy not to be an escapist like him. Again, why he does this? Because now he is leaving the earth. Okay, now he doesn't want the boy to knew the reality that he should follow the same way to live in the imaginary world, away from the realistic things. Okay, and become an escapist like him. So he wants the boy to discover the reality and be a part of the real life. Okay, so this is what is concept of the escapism, and I have connected with the story how this element of escapism is actually used in the story. I hope that you have understood the story. The story also speaks about the bond of friendship between the boy and the Wordsworth. Okay, now we know friendship between the two is actually strengthened. Now again we say that age is not a factor, or it's not necessary that the people of same age will be having this good bonding of the friendship. Okay, so irrespective of your age also the good friendship can be maintained. Okay, so this is the these are the different things that you have to keep in mind when you are actually focusing on this story. Okay, the one more point, sorry to, I'll wind up after this. One more thing is that the story also speaks about the the person as a lover of nature. Okay, we have seen that lot of elements are discussed related to the nature, the plants and the trees, the yard and the bushes, then we see the sky, the stars. Okay, so that shows that he himself is and observing the creatures, bees and beehives and ants, etc. That shows that the character B. Wordsworth, like his brother W. Wordsworth, was a lover of nature. Now he also uses this in the story that his brother is also a poet and he is W. Wordsworth. Okay, so it is indirectly referring to the greatest poem William Wordsworth. That means here the character B. Wordsworth is under the umbrella term of the famous poet W. Wordsworth. Okay, so I hope that you understood this much part, and we have finally come to an end of this story. So thank you, have a wonderful time.